The icy tears of 18-year-old Madeline Sinclair froze on her cheeks as she huddled against the bitter Montana wind, clutching nothing but a threadbare shawl and the devastating knowledge that her own stepfather had traded her like cattle for a mere $100 and a bottle of whiskey. The transaction had been completed not an hour earlier in the dimly lit back room of Bannack's only saloon, her stepfather Floyd Peters walking away with his payment while a leering stranger named Silas Harper gripped her arm, his hot breath reeking of tobacco and cheap liquor as he whispered promises of what her new life would entail. "You'll fetch a fine price at Miss Ruby's establishment," Silas had said, his yellow teeth gleaming in the lamplight. "Pretty thing like you. I'll double my investment within a month." Madeline knew exactly what that meant. Ever since her mother died of pneumonia last winter, Floyd had made no secret of his resentment at having to feed and house his dead wife's daughter. The threats had started in spring, and now, on this frigid November evening in 1871, he had finally made good on them. But Madeline had not gone willingly. When Silas stopped to water his horse at a creek just outside town, she had seized her chance, striking him with a rock and fleeing into the darkness. Now she was alone, lost, and freezing as snow began to fall from the Inkai, Montana sky. The distant glow of a cabin appeared through the trees like a miracle. Desperation overcame caution as Madeline stumbled toward it, her thin boots soaked through with snow. She had no plan beyond seeking momentary shelter, perhaps begging for a corner by the fire before moving on at first light. If Silas or Floyd found her, her fate would be worse than whatever awaited her at Miss Ruby's. Her trembling hand raised to knock on the weathered door, but before her knuckles could make contact, it swung open, flooding her with golden lamplight and blessed warmth. "Good Lord Almighty!" a deep voice exclaimed. "What in tarnation are you doing out in this weather, miss?" Madeline's vision swam as she looked up into the concerned face of a tall man with a thick mustache and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He wore a flannel shirt and had a worn leather vest hanging open. As she opened her mouth to explain, the world tilted sideways, and she felt herself falling forward into strong arms before darkness claimed her completely. When Madeline awoke, she was wrapped in a thick quilt before a crackling fire. The scent of coffee and something savory filled the small cabin. She tried to sit up, panic flooding her veins as memories came rushing back. "Easy there," came that same deep voice. "You're safe now." The man who had answered the door sat in a wooden chair nearby, whittling a piece of wood. Now that she could see him clearly, Madeline noted he was perhaps 30 years old, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and a neatly trimmed mustache. His jawline was strong, and his eyes, a clear blue-gray like the Montana sky after a storm, regarded her with genuine concern. "I'm Yates O'Malley," he said, setting aside his carving. "This here's my homestead. Found you half frozen on my doorstep. How long have I been asleep?" Madeline asked, her voice hoarse. "Just a few hours. It's still night." He stood and poured coffee into a tin cup, adding a generous spoonful of sugar before bringing it to her. "Drink this. It'll warm you from the inside out." She accepted the cup with shaking hands. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley." "Yates is fine." He returned to his chair. "Now, I don't mean to pry, but a young woman doesn't end up at a stranger's door in a snowstorm without a mighty troubling story behind it. You running from something, or someone." Madeline stared into her coffee, deliberating how much to share. This man had shown her kindness, but she'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with expectations. "My name is Madeline Sinclair," she finally said. "My stepfather sold me today to a man named Silas Harper." She lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze directly. "He intended to take me to a place called Miss Ruby's in Helena." Yates's expression darkened. "I know of it. It's no place for a decent woman. I escaped when he stopped to water his horse, but they'll be looking for me." She clutched the quilt tighter. "I should leave at first light. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Nonsense," Yates said firmly. "That storm's set to blow for at least 2 days, and besides, Harper's the kind who'd shoot a man for cheating at cards. I won't have you facing him alone." "You don't understand," Madeline insisted. "My stepfather has friends in town. When they discover I'm missing, let me worry about that," Yates interrupted. "This homestead is a good 5 miles from Bannack proper, and few know exactly where I live. I keep to myself mostly." He stirred the fire with a poker. "Besides, I've got some standing in these parts. The Vigilance Committee respects my word." Madeline had heard whispers of the vigilantes who had cleaned up Bannack after the reign of the notorious Sheriff Henry Plummer and his gang of road agents back in the mid-1860s. If Yates was connected to them, perhaps she truly might be safe here, at least temporarily. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicious of unearned kindness. "You don't know me." Yates was quiet for a moment. "6 years ago, my sister found herself in a similar predicament. Her husband died in the mines, leaving her with debts. A man offered to clear those debts in exchange for—" He cleared his throat. "Well, services of an unpleasant nature. She refused and tried to make her way to me, but the winter was harsh." His voice grew tight. "I found her too late." Madeline's heart constricted. "I'm sorry, so am I, but I can help you, Miss Sinclair, and I intend to." He stood again, this time ladling stew from a pot hanging over the fire into a bowl. "First, you need to eat, then rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's to be done." The stew was hearty venison with potatoes and carrots, and Madeline realized she was famished. She ate while Yates moved about the cabin, making up a pallet for himself near the door. "You'll take the bed," he said when she protested. "It's not much, but it's clean and warm." That night, despite her fears and uncertainties, Madeline slept soundly in Yates O'Malley's rough-hewn bed, the sound of his gentle snores from across the room oddly comforting. Morning brought clarity, and the realization that the cabin was more substantial than she'd initially thought in her frozen state. It was a proper log home with 2 rooms, the main living area with its fireplace, table and cooking area, and a smaller bedroom. There was also a lean-to attached that served as a storage area and workspace. "Been building this place for 3 years now," Yates explained as he showed her around. "Started with just the 1 room, but I aim to make it something substantial eventually." "It's lovely," Madeline said sincerely, noting the careful craftsmanship of the furniture, which she now realized Yates had made himself. "It's a bit rough for a lady," he said, a hint of color touching his cheeks, "but it serves me well enough." The storm continued as predicted, confining them to the cabin. Yates proved to be excellent company, intelligent, well-spoken for a frontier man, and possessed of a dry wit that often made Madeline laugh despite her circumstances. He told her he'd come west after the war between the states, having fought for the Union and finding civilian life in Pennsylvania too confining afterward. "Lost my taste for crowds," he explained as they shared coffee on the second morning. "Out here, a man can breathe." "And what do you do out here besides breathe?" Madeline asked. "I raise horses," Yates said with evident pride. "Got a small herd of quarter horses I breed and train, sell them to the stage companies or private buyers who appreciate quality stock. Do some hunting and trapping in winter to supplement." He showed her sketches he'd made of a larger ranch house he planned to build once the horse business was more established. His dreams were modest, but solid, the kind that grew from hard work rather than wild speculation. By the 3rd day, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed into a pristine white landscape. Yates saddled a horse and rode into Bannack to gather news, leaving Madeline with a loaded rifle and strict instructions to stay indoors. He returned by mid-afternoon, his expression grim. "Harper's in town, drinking heavily and offering a $50 reward for information about your whereabouts," he reported. "Your stepfather is claiming you stole money before you ran off." "That's a lie," Madeline said, anger flaring. "Floyd never had money to steal. He drank every penny he earned at the sawmill." "I believe you," Yates assured her, "but it complicates matters. The good news is that the marshal doesn't seem inclined to get involved. He knows Harper's reputation and likely suspects the truth." "What am I to do?" Madeline asked, sinking onto a chair. "I can't stay here indefinitely, imposing on your kindness." Yates removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking on that. I have a friend, Mrs. Alina Jenkins, who runs a respectable boarding house in Virginia City. It's 2 days' ride from here, but she might take you in, give you honest work." "I would welcome honest work," Madeline said eagerly. "I can cook clean, so my mother made sure I learned all the household arts before she passed. Then it's settled. We'll leave for Virginia City tomorrow." Yates hesitated. "There's just one matter that might make the journey safer for you." "What's that?" "If we were to travel as husband and wife, it would draw less attention. A simple gold band on your finger would discourage questions about a young woman traveling with a man not her kin." His cheeks colored slightly. "It would be a pretense only, of course, for your protection." Madeline considered this. The idea of pretending to be married to Yates didn't trouble her as much as it perhaps should have. In the few days she'd known him, he'd shown himself to be honorable and kind. More importantly, he'd asked rather than assumed. "I think that's wise," she agreed. Yates nodded, looking relieved. "I have a small band that was my mother's. You can wear it for the journey." That evening, as Madeline helped prepare their dinner, she found herself watching Yates more closely. There was a grace to his movements despite his large frame, and when he smiled, the entire cabin seemed warmer somehow. She couldn't deny a flutter in her chest when his hand accidentally brushed hers as they worked side by side. "Tell me about your life before Montana," she asked as they ate. Yates looked surprised by the question but seemed pleased to be asked. "Born and raised in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith, taught me the trade, but I always had a way with horses even as a boy." His expression grew distant. "When the war came, I joined up with the cavalry. Spent 4 years fighting, mostly in Virginia and Tennessee." "And your family?" Madeline probed gently. "Parents both passed before the war. My sister Margaret was all I had left." Pain flickered across his features. "After she died, I decided there was nothing keeping me east." He turned the conversation. "What of you? You mentioned your mother." Madeline told him of her childhood in St. Louis, where her father had been a clerk for a shipping company. When he died of typhoid when she was 12, her mother had remarried within a year out of financial necessity. Floyd Peters had seemed decent enough at first, but after they moved west to Montana Territory when Madeline was 15, his true nature emerged. "He was cruel to my mother, though she tried to hide it," Madeline said softly. "After she died last winter, he made it clear I was a burden he'd never wanted." "No child should bear such treatment," Yates said, his hand clenching around his fork, "nor any woman." "I had planned to leave when spring came," Madeline admitted. "I'd saved a little money from mending clothes for townspeople, but Floyd found it." She shook her head. "That's what led to him selling me to Harper. He said if I was determined to leave, I might as well be worth something to him in the going." Yates's expression was thunderous, but his voice remained gentle. "You're worth far more than such men could ever comprehend, Madeline." She looked up at him, startled by the intensity in his eyes, and felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire. They departed at dawn the next morning, Madeline riding a gentle mare Yates called Willow while he rode his stallion, Thunder. She wore her own clothes, now cleaned and dried, with Yates's mother's ring on her finger and a borrowed coat that engulfed her small frame but kept the cold at bay. Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins is a good woman, Yates told her as they rode. Widowed during the gold rush days when her husband caught a fever in the diggings, she turned their cabin into a boarding house for respectable miners and businessmen. She'll treat you fairly. You seem to know many good people, Madeline observed. Yates smiled. I try to. Life's too short to spend it among those who aren't. Their journey took them through spectacular mountain passes and valleys blanketed in snow. They camped the first night in a sheltered hollow, Yates rigging a canvas shelter and building a fire that kept the worst of the cold at bay. He insisted Madeline take the only bedroll while he sat up with his rifle across his knees. I'll doze some, he assured her, but someone should keep watch. Despite his assurances, Madeline noticed the shadows under his eyes the next morning and insisted on sharing the riding duties, taking the reins of Willow for longer stretches to allow him to rest in the saddle. They encountered few travelers on the snow-covered trails, but those they did meet nodded respectfully to Mr. and Mrs. O'Malley, without question. By the second afternoon, Madeline found herself responding naturally to the pretense, a part of her warming to the fantasy of being Yates's wife in truth. Virginia City appeared on the horizon as dusk approached on the second day, a bustling settlement larger than Bannack, with proper streets and substantial buildings interspersed with the rough cabins and tents typical of mining towns. Mrs. Jenkins's boarding house was a two-story structure on a side street, its windows glowing with welcoming light. The woman who answered Yates's knock was in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled into a tidy bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Yates O'Malley, as I live and breathe, she exclaimed, ushering them inside. It's been almost a year since you passed through. Been busy with the horses, Eleanor, Yates said, stamping snow from his boots. This is Madeline Sinclair. I wrote to you about her situation. Eleanor's gaze softened as it fell on Madeline. Yes, you poor dear. Come in, come in. I've got stew on and fresh bread just out of the oven. Over dinner in Eleanor's private quarters, away from the curious eyes of her boarders, Yates explained Madeline's circumstances more fully, including the threats posed by Harper and Floyd. They're not likely to track her this far, Yates concluded, but if they should, I'd feel better knowing she had friends watching out for her. She'll be safe here, Eleanor assured him. I don't allow unsavory types in my establishment and the local law is reliable. She patted Madeline's hand. And I could certainly use the help, child. My arthritis makes the stairs a trial these days. The arrangement was quickly settled. Madeline would work for room, board, and a small wage, helping Eleanor with cooking, cleaning, and the general running of the boarding house. You'll sleep in the small room off the kitchen, Eleanor told her. It's snug but private. Later, as Yates prepared to take his leave planning to spend the night at the livery stable before heading back to Bannack at first light, Madeline walked him to the door, a strange hollowness forming in her chest. I can never repay your kindness, she said softly. There's nothing to repay, Yates replied. Any decent man would have done the same. We both know that's not true. Madeline met his eyes. You're a rare sort, Yates O'Malley. He ducked his head, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. Eleanor will take good care of you. You'll be safe here. Will I see you again? The question slipped out before Madeline could stop it. Yates looked surprised, then pleased. I come through Virginia City every few months to trade and pick up supplies. He hesitated. If you'd like, I could call on you when I do. I would like that very much." Madeline removed the gold band from her finger and held it out to him. "You'll be wanting this back." Yates closed her fingers around the ring. "Keep it, for safekeeping. It gives me a reason to return." After he left, Madeline stood at the window watching his tall figure disappear into the snowy evening, the small gold band clutched in her palm like a promise. Life at Alina Jenkins's boarding house quickly fell into a pleasant routine. The work was hard but satisfying, and Alina proved to be not only a fair employer but a wise mentor. Under her guidance, Madeline learned to manage household accounts, to negotiate with suppliers, and to handle the occasional difficult boarder with a firm but diplomatic hand. "You've a good head for business," Alina remarked one evening as they reviewed the month's earnings. "Better than most men I've known." "My father taught me figures when I was young," Madeline explained. "He believed girls should learn as well as boys, though my mother thought it improper." "Your father was a wise man." Alina set aside the ledger. "You know, I'm not getting any younger. Been thinking about taking on a partner in this business someday." The hint was clear, and Madeline felt a surge of gratitude. The boarding house was prosperous, and such an opportunity would provide security she'd never known. Yet even as she thanked Alina for her confidence, a part of her mind wandered to Yates and his remote homestead. True to his word, Yates returned to Virginia City 3 months after leaving Madeline there. He arrived on a crisp spring morning, looking travel-worn but pleased, his face breaking into a broad smile when Madeline answered the door. "You're looking well," he said, his eyes taking in her neat appearance. The hollowness in her cheeks had filled out with regular meals, and her chestnut hair was arranged in a becoming style. "As are you," she replied, suddenly shy. "Please come in. Alina will be delighted to see you." They spent the afternoon catching up. Yates had expanded his horse operation, acquiring 2 new mares with excellent bloodlines. The foaling season had been successful, with 5 healthy colts that promised to fetch good prices when trained. And Harper? Madeline asked the question that had lingered in her mind. "Left Bannack a month after you did," Yates reported. "Word is he found trouble in a card game in Helena and ended up on the wrong side of a knife." Madeline couldn't summon much sympathy for the man who had intended to sell her into prostitution. "And my stepfather, still at the sawmill, still drinking most of what he earns." Yates's expression hardened. "I made sure he understood that any attempt to find you would be met with significant resistance." The thought of Yates confronting Floyd on her behalf sent a warm flutter through Madeline's chest. "Thank you." Before Yates departed the following day, he asked if he might write to her. "I'm no great hand with words," he admitted, "but I'd like to know how you're faring." "I'd welcome your letters," Madeline said, perhaps too eagerly, "and I could write to you as well if you'd like." His smile was answer enough. The letters began simply enough updates on their respective lives, observations about the changing seasons, small anecdotes about daily occurrences. But as months passed, a deeper current developed in their correspondence. Yates described his hopes for the future, his dreams of building something lasting in the Montana wilderness. Madeline shared her growing confidence, her enjoyment of independence, and her own quiet aspirations. "I've never told anyone these things," she wrote in one letter. "It feels rather like speaking to my own heart when I write to you." Yates's response came a week later. "I find myself saying things to you on paper that I've never spoken aloud. Perhaps there's freedom in distance, or perhaps it's simply that you understand in a way few others could." When he visited again in late summer, something had shifted between them. There was an awareness, a tension that hadn't existed before. They took a walk along the creek that ran behind the boarding house, conversation flowing easily but with new undercurrents. "I've been thinking," Yates said as they sat on a fallen log watching the water ripple over stones. "The homestead feels emptier since you stayed there, quieter." Madeline's heart quickened. "Do you regret helping me?" "Never," he said firmly. "But I do miss your presence, your laugh." He looked down at his hands. "I find myself looking up when the door opens, half expecting to see you there." The confession hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to voice aloud. "I think of the cabin often," Madeline admitted. "Of those days we spent there during the storm. Despite the circumstances, I felt." She searched for the right word. "Safe, at peace." Yates looked at her then, his blue-gray eyes intense. "Madeline." But whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the arrival of one of the boarders, calling Madeline back to help with a minor crisis in the kitchen. The moment passed, unresolved. When Yates left the next day, their farewell was charged with things unsaid. He held her hand longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that sent warmth spreading up her arm. "I'll return in the autumn," he promised. "There's more I want to say to you, things better said in person than in letters." Madeline nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I'll be here." The autumn visit never came. A week before Yates was expected, a letter arrived instead, its contents chilling. "Forgive my absence," Yates wrote. "Rustlers hit the north pasture. 2 of my best breeding mares were taken, along with a yearling colt. I'm riding with the sheriff and some men from neighboring ranches to track them. By the time you receive this, we should be returning one way or another. I'll come to Virginia City as soon as I can afterward." 2 weeks passed with no word. Then 3. Madeline found herself watching the road from town anxiously, starting at every knock on the boarding house door. When a stranger arrived asking for her by name in late October, her heart nearly stopped. The man was Sheriff Thomas Lawson from Bannack, his weather-beaten face solemn beneath his hat. "Miss Sinclair," he said, removing his hat, "I'm afraid I have news about Yates O'Malley." The world seemed to tilt beneath Madeline's feet. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," the sheriff said quickly, seeing her distress. "But he's been shot. The rustlers ambushed our party in a narrow canyon. Yates took a bullet in the shoulder and another grazed his side." "How badly is he hurt?" Madeline asked, clutching the doorframe for support. "Doc Simmons patched him up, but he developed a fever. He's been asking for you, miss. That's why I rode out here myself." Sheriff Lawson looked uncomfortable. "He's not in good shape, I won't lie to you. The journey would be difficult this time of year, but if you wanted to see him—" "I'll come," Madeline said without hesitation. "When do we leave?" Eleanor insisted on packing provisions and lending Madeline her warmest cloak and gloves for the journey. "That man saved your life," she said as she helped Madeline prepare. "Now go and save his." The journey back to Bannack was brutal. Early winter storms had left the mountain passes treacherous, and twice they were forced to shelter in crude line shacks to wait out blizzard conditions. Sheriff Lawson proved to be a capable and considerate traveling companion, setting a pace that was urgent but not reckless. "Yates is well respected in these parts," he told Madeline as they rode. "He's a man of his word, fair in his dealings. Serves on the vigilance committee when needed but isn't quick to judge." He glanced at her. "Been different this past year, though. Happier, folks say. Now we know why." Madeline blushed but didn't correct the sheriff's assumption. Whatever existed between her and Yates remained undefined, even to herself. They reached Bannack on the afternoon of the 4th day, making directly for the doctor's residence on the outskirts of town. Dr. Simmons, a stout man with spectacles and a beard streaked with gray, met them at the door. "You must be Madeline," he said, his keen eyes assessing her. "He's been calling for you in his fever dreams." "How is he?" Madeline asked, removing her gloves with trembling fingers. Touch and go. The shoulder wound was clean, bullet went straight through, but the one on his side got infected. I've been drawing out the poison, but he's weak from blood loss and fever. Dr. Simmons's expression softened. Having you here might make the difference, young lady. Men like Yates sometimes need a reason to fight harder. He led her to a small room at the back of the house where Yates lay on a narrow bed, his normally robust frame looking shrunken beneath the blankets. His face was pale except for 2 spots of fever red on his cheeks, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. Madeline's composure nearly broke at the sight of him. She approached the bed slowly, taking his hand between hers. It felt hot and dry. "Yates," she said softly, "I'm here." For a moment there was no response. Then his eyelids fluttered and he turned his head slightly toward the sound of her voice. "Madeline," his voice was a rasp, barely audible. "You came." "Of course I came," she replied, blinking back tears. "You would do the same for me." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "Always." He drifted back into unconsciousness soon after, but his breathing seemed easier, and Dr. Simmons noted that his pulse was stronger. "Talk to him," the doctor advised as he prepared fresh poultices for the wounds. "Even in fever sleep, he may hear you. Give him an anchor to this world." And so Madeline talked. She told Yates about the boarding house, about her friendship with Eleanor, about the books she'd read and the sunsets she'd watched from the porch thinking of him. When she ran out of present matters, she spoke of her hopes for the future, dreams she'd barely acknowledged to herself. "I'd like to see your homestead again," she said, bathing his forehead with cool water. "To see how the foals have grown, to help you build that larger house you sketched." She hesitated, then added more softly, "To make a life there if you wanted that too." 3 days passed in this manner, Madeline leaving Yates's side only when Dr. Simmons insisted she rest. On the morning of the 4th day, she awoke from a brief nap in the chair beside his bed to find him watching her, his eyes clear of fever for the first time. "You're still here," he said, his voice weak but steady. Joy surged through Madeline's heart. "I'm still here," she confirmed, taking his hand. "I heard you," Yates said, his fingers tightening around hers. "Talking to me through the darkness, your voice was like a lifeline." Madeline's cheeks flushed. "You heard everything? Enough." His eyes held hers. "Enough to know that what I planned to tell you this autumn needn't wait any longer." "And what was that?" Madeline asked, barely breathing. "That I love you," Yates said simply. "That my home feels empty without you in it, that I want to build something lasting with you if you'll have me." Tears spilled down Madeline's cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first night in your cabin when you gave me your bed and slept on the floor." Yates's recovery progressed steadily after that day. Within a week, he was sitting up, taking solid food and arguing with Dr. Simmons about when he could return home. "Not until I say so," the doctor insisted. "That shoulder needs at least another fortnight to heal properly, or you'll never have full use of the arm again." During this convalescence, Yates and Madeline spent long hours together, learning each other's histories more deeply, discussing their hopes for the future, and simply enjoying one another's company without the constraint of distance. "I want to court you properly," Yates said one afternoon as they sat together by the window. "Not just letters and visits every few months." "I'd like that," Madeline replied, smiling, "though I admit our courtship has been rather unconventional from the start." "Nothing about our meeting was conventional," Yates agreed with a chuckle. "Found you half dead on my doorstep in a blizzard. Most men meet their future wives at church socials or town dances." "Future wives?" Madeline's heart skipped a beat. Yates reached for her hand, his expression turning serious. "I'm not a man for half measures, Madeline. When I'm well enough to kneel properly, I intend to ask for your hand. but I wanted you to know my intentions now, to give you time to consider if that's what you want to." "I don't need time," Madeline said, squeezing his hand. "My answer will be yes." The joy in Yates's eyes was answer enough, but he sealed the moment by bringing her hand to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her palm. "2 days before Christmas, Doctor." Simmons finally pronounced Yates fit enough to return home, though with strict instructions about limiting physical activity for at least another month. The question of Madeline's future required resolution. She had sent word to Alina about the situation, receiving a warm reply that included her blessing and the suggestion that perhaps Virginia City's loss would be Bannack's gain. "I'll need to return to Virginia City eventually," Madeline told Yates as they discussed the matter, "to properly thank Alina and collect my belongings. We could go together once the worst of winter passes," Yates suggested, "and perhaps visit the preacher while we're there." The proposal, indirect as it was, brought a radiant smile to Madeline's face. "Are you asking me to marry you, Yates O'Malley?" he grimaced, looking chagrined. "I meant to do it more formally, with a proper ring and down on one knee." "I don't need formality," Madeline assured him, moving to sit beside him on the edge of the bed. "Just you." Yates took both her hands in his. "Madeline Sinclair, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? I can't offer wealth or luxury, but I promise to work hard every day to make a good life for us, to protect you, respect you, and love you until my dying day." "Yes," Madeline whispered, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes. "Yes, I will marry you." Their first kiss was tender, a gentle meeting of lips that held the promise of a lifetime of such moments to come. Yates's homestead welcomed them back on Christmas Eve, the cabin looking just as Madeline remembered it from that fateful night over a year ago. A neighbor had been caring for the horses and keeping the place in order during Yates's absence, and a fire was already burning in the hearth when they arrived. "It's not much," Yates said as he helped Madeline down from the wagon they'd hired in town, "but with time and work, it will be more." "It's perfect," Madeline replied, looking around at the snow-covered pastures, the sturdy barn, and the small cabin that had been her first sanctuary. "It's home." They were married in Virginia City in April 1873, with Alina Jenkins and several of her boarders in attendance, along with a handful of Yates's neighbors and friends from Bannack. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held in the town's small church with wildflowers decorating the altar. "I, Yates, take thee, Madeline," he said, his voice clear and steady as he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, the same ring she had worn during their pretend marriage over a year before. "I, Madeline, take thee, Yates," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst with happiness. They returned to the homestead as husband and wife, the journey now familiar and filled with anticipation rather than uncertainty. Spring had transformed the landscape, with green shoots pushing through the soil and wildflowers dotting the meadows. That first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The horse business flourished under their combined efforts, Yates's skill, with training complemented by Madeline's head for figures and organization. They expanded the cabin as planned, adding 2 more rooms and improving the existing spaces with Madeline's touch. In late autumn, as the first snows began to dust the mountains, Madeline shared news that filled Yates with speechless joy. They were expecting a child in the spring. "A baby," he whispered, placing a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Our family," Madeline corrected, covering his hand with hers. "The family you promised me that very first night, though neither of us knew it then." The baby, a boy they named William Thomas O'Malley, was born on a clear May morning in 1874, with a neighbor woman serving as midwife. He had his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's determined chin. "He's perfect," Yates said, cradling his son with careful hands that trembled slightly. "Absolutely perfect." As William grew from infant to toddler, the homestead grew as well. Yates's reputation as a horse breeder spread, bringing buyers from as far away as Denver. They hired help, a young cowhand named Jake and his wife Betsy, who moved into the original cabin while Yates and Madeline occupied the new main house he'd built with his own hands. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons, spring bringing foals and planting, summer filled with training and growing, autumn with harvests and preparation, winter with close family moments around the hearth. It was during their third winter as a family that the past intruded unexpectedly. Madeline was in the kitchen, kneading bread while 3-year-old William played with carved wooden horses on the floor nearby, when a knock came at the door. Yates was in the barn, so Madeline wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer, expecting perhaps Jake or Betsy with a question. Instead, she found herself face to face with Floyd Peters, her stepfather. He looked older, more haggard, the years of hard drinking evident in his bloated face and trembling hands, but his eyes were the same, cold and calculating. "Madeline," he said, a smile that didn't reach his eyes spreading across his face. "Look at you, all grown up and proper." Madeline's blood turned to ice, but she kept her composure, conscious of William behind her. "Floyd," she acknowledged, not inviting him in. "What are you doing here?" "Can a father visit his daughter?" he asked, attempting to peer around her into the house. "You're not my father," Madeline said evenly. "And you sold me to a stranger for $100 and a bottle of whiskey. You have no place here." Floyd's expression hardened. "I've fallen on hard times, girl. Lost my job at the sawmill. Thought maybe you could help your old stepfather out, seeing as you've done so well for yourself." His gaze drifted to the large house, the well-maintained barn, the healthy horses in the corral. "Married up, didn't you? To that O'Malley fellow?" "Mama!" William's small voice came from behind her, and Madeline felt a flash of fear. "Go to your room, William," she said firmly, not taking her eyes off Floyd. "Now, please." The little boy, sensing the tension, obeyed without question, scurrying toward the back of the house. "Got yourself a family too," Floyd observed, his tone turning ugly. "How nice for you. All I'm asking is a little help, some money to get me back on my feet. You owe me that much for raising you." "I owe you nothing," Madeline replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Please leave." Floyd's face contorted with anger. "Now you listen here, is there a problem?" Yates's deep voice came from behind Floyd, causing the older man to spin around. Yates stood there, his tall frame imposing, a rifle held casually but unmistakably at the ready. "No problem," Floyd said quickly, his demeanor changing instantly. "Just paying a social call on my stepdaughter." "Your stepdaughter has made it clear she doesn't welcome your visit," Yates said calmly. "I suggest you leave our property immediately." Floyd glanced between them, clearly assessing his options. "I only came looking for a little Christian charity," he whined. "Times are hard." "There's a stage coach leaving Bannack for Helena tomorrow morning," Yates said. "Here's $10 for your ticket." He reached into his pocket with his free hand and extracted the money. "Take it and go. Don't come back." Floyd snatched the money, his expression sullen. "Ungrateful, that's what she always was." "After all I did, go," Yates interrupted, his voice hardening as he raised the rifle slightly. "Now." They watched as Floyd trudged back to the broken-down horse he'd left tied to a fence post, mounted awkwardly, and rode away. Only when he was out of sight did Madeline's composure break. She sagged against the doorframe, shaking. Yates was at her side instantly, setting the rifle aside to wrap his arms around her. "He's gone," he murmured into her hair. "He won't bother you again. How did he find us?" Madeline asked, her voice muffled against Yates's chest. "Bannack's not that big. He probably heard talk about the O'Malley horse ranch and put it together." Yates guided her back into the house, closing the door firmly behind them. "Are you all right?" Madeline nodded slowly. "I just never thought I'd see him again," when he looked at William. "He'll never hurt either of you," Yates promised fiercely. "I'd die before I let that happen." William emerged cautiously from his room, his small face concerned. "Mama sad." Madeline knelt down, opening her arms to her son. "Mama's fine, sweetheart. That was just someone Mama knew a long time ago. He's gone now." As she held her child close, Madeline realized that the fear Floyd had once inspired in her had diminished. In its place was a calm certainty that he no longer held any power over her life. She had built something stronger than his malice, a family founded on love and respect. That evening, after William was asleep, Madeline and Yates sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for today, but for everything. For saving me that night, for giving me a home, a family." Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved yourself, Madeline. You had the courage to run, to fight for a better life. I was just fortunate enough to be the one whose door you knocked on." "Still," she insisted, "you could have turned me away. Many would have." "Not possible," Yates said with a smile. "The moment I saw you standing there in the snow, something told me my life was about to change forever. I just didn't know how much better it would become." As they sat there in the warmth of their home, secure in their love for each other and for the child sleeping peacefully down the hall, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the terror of being sold by her stepfather to the joy of the family she and Yates had created together. Every step, even the painful ones, had led to this moment of perfect contentment. Outside, snow began to fall gently, reminiscent of that fateful night when a desperate young woman had found sanctuary on a stranger's doorstep. But this time, Madeline watched it from within the circle of her husband's arms, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged. In the years that followed, the O'Malley ranch prospered and grew. 2 more children joined their family, a daughter named Alina Grace, born in 1877, and another son, James Robert, who arrived in 1880. The original homestead expanded to include not only the main house and outbuildings, but also comfortable homes for the growing number of workers employed on what was now one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the territory. Yates, with Madeline as his partner in every sense, built a reputation not just for fine horses but for fair dealing. Their home became known as a place of hospitality, where travelers could find a warm meal and good conversation. They helped other families get their start, remembering always how their own journey together had begun with an act of kindness during a winter storm. William grew into a tall, thoughtful young man with his father's way with horses and his mother's compassionate nature. Alina, named for the boarding house proprietor who had been so kind to Madeline, inherited her mother's business acumen along with her father's determined spirit. Little James, the baby of the family, combined the best qualities of both parents with a mischievous streak entirely his own. Floyd Peters never returned to trouble them. They heard, some years later, that he had died in a mining accident near Helena alone, and unmourned, having squandered whatever money Yates had given him on drink and gambling. On cold winter nights, Yates and Madeline would sometimes sit by the fire after the children were asleep, marveling at the life they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. "You ever regret it?" Madeline asked once, on the 15th anniversary of the night she had appeared on his doorstep. "Taking in a half-frozen stranger who brought nothing but trouble to your door?" Yates looked at her, his blue-gray eyes soft with love, the lines at their corners deeper now but making his gaze no less intense than when they had first met. "Not for a single moment," he answered, taking her hand and pressing it to his heart. "You brought trouble, yes, but you also brought love, purpose, family. Everything that matters." He smiled, the smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Besides, Mrs. O'Malley, as I recall, I didn't exactly give you a choice about coming in that night." "No," Madeline agreed, leaning into his embrace. "But you gave me every choice after that, including the choice to love you, which turned out to be the easiest and best decision I ever made." Their lips met in a kiss as tender as their first, yet deepened by years of shared joy, hardship, and unwavering commitment to each other. And the family they had created, a real family, built on love, respect, and the courage to believe in second chances. And as snow fell once more outside their window, Madeline Sinclair O'Malley knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the darkest moments in life, even being sold by a cruel stepfather, could lead to the brightest futures, if one found the courage to keep moving forward toward the light.